Alright, what's going on everyone? Today I'm going to show you how to build a competitive modern burn deck on a budget, which should be well suited for smaller Friday night magic events or casual kitchen table play. We will be going over how the deck works, as I've already done that in another video, and I've also already played the deck, so if you want to see how this deck works or see it in action, I will leave links to those videos in the description below. Today I'm just showing you how you can build it yourself on a budget. So Modern Burn is interesting. It's a very interesting deck to budgetize because on one hand, outside of the mana base, not counting the mana base, there isn't anything incredibly expensive in the deck. In fact, the most expensive card in the entire deck, again, except for the fetches and shocks in the mana base, is Eidolon of the Great Revel at $8 each. Now don't get me wrong, $24 for a playset of a single card is kind of a lot for some people, but in a format where, decks run playsets of cards that cost $50 to $100 each, $8 being the most expensive card in the entire deck, it's much more reasonable and it's actually very affordable. On the flip side, tons of cards in this deck cost $1 or $2 each. Even many of the commons and uncommon burn spells cost like $1 each. So even though there's nothing super expensive, there's also like no 25-cent bulk cards in the deck, so like it adds up really quick when you're building it. You're like adding a few dollars here, a few dollars there, but it adds up super quick. So it's difficult to get this super cheap, but it is very attainable and it's very easy to upgrade because you could spend $10 here, $10 there, and slowly upgrade it over time fairly easily, and it doesn't cost a whole lot at the end. So just to give you an example, let's look at the Mono Red Burn package. Lightning bolts are currently $1.93 each, or about $7.72 for your playset. Keep in mind these prices are in USD. I know it's not relevant to everyone, but just to give you an idea, we're using US dollars for the prices here. And this basically illustrates the problem, right? Lightning bolt has been printed 1,000,000 times at common. It's been printed over and over and over and over again, and yet here we are at close to $10 for a playset, because that's how burn is. It's very annoying, just little cards that keep adding up to more than you would expect. So next up is our collection of sort of pseudo lightning bolts. Rift bolts are 25 cents each. There's one bulk card. Skewer the Critics are 43 cents each, and Lava Spikes are $2.71 each. So once again, we have a massively overpriced uncommon that might actually be worth swapping out for a bulk burn spell. We'll take a look at that in a little bit. But once again, it adds up to more than you would expect for, some commons and uncommons. After that, we have our utility burn spells like Skullcrack and Searing Blaze. The Skullcracks are $1.64 each, and the Searing Blazes are $1.10. So once again, these are commons, and they're not that expensive, right? Technically not that expensive, but they just keep adding up. So assuming we buy the entire burn package without making any cuts for the budget, it's already at $32. So if you're planning on building this deck with a $100 budget, I think you could just buy the entire burn package. You don't have to think about it. But if you're looking to build this for like $50, I think we actually have to make some cuts to the burn package, just because, again, there's so many little $1 to $2 cards that it adds up to more than you would expect. So like a good budget replacement for Skullcrack would be something like Flames of the Blood Hand. It's the same effect, it negates life gain. It does cost 1 extra mana, so it's clunkier, although it does do 1 extra damage. It does 4 damage instead of 3, so this is a serviceable replacement. It'll save you a few dollars if necessary. As for Lava Spike, there isn't a really perfect replacement. The only other 2 cards in Modern that deal 3 damage for 1 mana that doesn't completely suck is Wizard's Lightning and Shard Volley. So we can roll out Wizard's Lightning. It's not reliable. We don't have enough wizards to support it. And Shard Volley is very, very dangerous if we have 4 copies, because what if our opening hand has like 3 lands and 3 Shard Volleys? That's not functional. So Shard Volley is really good, but because we have to sacrifice a land, I do not recommend playing 4 copies of it. You could play like 1 or 2. A burn is going to be okay with sacrificing a land or 2 usually. So like 1, maybe 2, kind of fine, but definitely not 4. There's also Thunderous Wrath, so technically it could deal 5 damage for 1 mana with Miracle. However, it's basically a dead card if we draw it in our opener because we can never cast it. And that's very dangerous with this deck. You do not want to be drawing dead cards when you already run the risk of gassing out. And the problem with this deck is it's actually more likely to draw it in your opening hand than it is to draw it off the top. Because remember, you start with 7 cards, right? You draw 7 cards, and most burn games do not last 7 turns. It's very rare for a burn game to go 7 turns. It does happen, but it's not very likely. Meaning that statistically, you're actually more likely to draw in your opening 7 than in the 4 or 5 cards you'll draw in an average game. So that makes this kind of terrible. Basically, I would never want more than 1 of these in the deck, and it's questionable because it could be a dead card. It's more likely to be dead than it is to be good. You could also play like 2 Shard Volleys and 2 Flame Rifts. It sucks making the mana curve even worse with another expensive card, but Flame Rift, it's not bad. It could work as a budget option. You could play 2 Shard Volleys, 2 Flame Rifts in place of Lava Spike until you can, spend the $10 or whatever to get those. Our next major concern is the Boros Splash. Normally the deck splashes white for Lightning Helix and Boros Charm, and neither of these cards are very expensive, though once again they're a little bit more pricey than you might expect for 2 uncommons, but the bigger problem is the mana base. In order to play these 2 cards, which again, not that expensive in themselves, you have to play things like Arid Mesa, Sacred Foundry, and Inspiring Vantage, and these are very, very expensive. It adds $170 to the deck's price. And remember, this is a burn deck, so you cannot, let me be clear about this, you cannot budgetize the mana base by adding lands that enter tapped. It is a major no-no. Burn has to play aggressively and it has to win in the first few turns. I can't stress this enough. You do not want tapped lands. You need to avoid that at all costs. And yes, technically the deck plays Inspiring Vantage, which can enter tapped, but the reason Inspiring Vantage is played is because it enters untapped in the first couple turns, which is when it matters. And if you have 3 or 4 lands, then at that point you're flooded anyway and it doesn't matter. So Inspiring Vantage is fine, but for the most part you do not want tap lands basically ever. Likewise, basic planes are also really, really bad. The majority of your cards are red and you want to cast multiples of them per turn. 1 or 2 planes in an opening hand will make the deck basically not function. Like if you draw 4 lightning bolts, 2 planes, and a mountain, you can only play 1 card per turn, and that's unusable. So you can't do that. That's why you want dual lands that enter untapped, and unfortunately, they're all very expensive. The best budget option you have is something like the Pain Land, right? This is totally fine. You could definitely play this. It's what I played in my gameplay video, but that's not enough to support all the white in the deck. So I recommend for now just cutting the white splash, going with mono red, and playing some budget red burn spells. You could play a couple more Flame Rifts. You could play Magma Jet, which isn't great, but it's fine. Or one of the endless Lightning Strike variants, which also isn't great, but it works. Lightning Strike isn't really powerful enough to be played in Modern, but it can work for kitchen table Magic, and it can work as a placeholder until you get the more expensive cards you need, so that's probably the best option you have. In the meantime, we also can't afford the Horizon lands. These are critical for burn because they allow the deck to ditch excess lands when it floods out for more cards, for more burn spells hopefully. There are a number of decent filtering options in red though. You can play like Cathartic Reunion, Light Up the Stage, Bedlam Reveler. All of these can help mitigate flood by giving you access to more cards. Risk Factor also works as it either deals 4 damage or the opponent lets you draw more cards, so it can help you draw out of flood, and it has Jumpstart, so it can be cast multiple times. You can discard excess lands to the Jumpstart of Risk Factor, and you can play all of these cards in the place of Boros Charm and Lightning Helix, right? Then we have the creature package, Goblin Guide, Monastery Swift Spear, Eidolon of Great Revel, and once again, these cards aren't terribly overpriced. We don't have $50 creatures or $70 creatures, but they're all a little bit more expensive than I would like. So in my opinion, I personally recommend keeping Goblin Guide and Monastery Swiftspear. At the very least, Monastery Swiftspear definitely worth the $12 or so. It's like one of the best red aggro creatures in Modern, especially in a deck that's built around spells. Definitely recommend it. Don't cut that. Ideally, Goblin Guide should also stay, but if you absolutely have to, basically any 1 mana 2 power creature can work. Get 2 Lava Runner is kind of okay. After you've cast a few spells, it's basically a Goblin Guide. It's a 1 mana 2/2. It's not reliable and you can't play it on turn 1 that way, or you can play it on turn 1, but it's not going to be attacking for 2 for a few turns. So Get 2 Lava Runner might be one of the better budget options for Goblin Guide, but it's kind of so. Fortunately, at $7 each, if you have to throw Get 2 Lava Runners in, but then buy a Goblin Guide here, buy a Goblin Guide there, and slowly upgrade it, definitely worth it. We also don't have a great replacement for the Eidolon. I think you just have to play something like Viashino Pyromancer, Runaway Steamkin, maybe even like Keldon Marauders. None of these are fantastic. The Steamkin is probably the best option. The extra mana might actually be useful, especially with a deck that's playing more expensive cards, right? Because we're having to make budget cuts. We're having to play, 2 mana and 3 mana spells, which we don't really want to do in Burn. So if we're going to do that, then at least Runaway Steamkin can give us some extra mana so we can cast these 3 mana burn spells. So Runaway Steamkin, probably the most solid option. Viashino Pyromancer is fine. Keldon Marauders is kind of okay, right? Like it deals the damage when it enters, it deals the damage when it leaves, so it's guaranteed 2 mana, 2 damage, and then you get like 1 attack with a 3/3, so maybe it deals 5. It's basically 2 mana, and you're gonna deal 2 or 5 damage depending on whether they take the attack or not. So it's okay, but it's not exceptional. So yeah, those are all fine. Also note that Grim Lavamancer is also a great budget option. This card is not very expensive, and it's useful for filling up space, though I do recommend playing no more than like 1 or 2 copies because they get less and less good in multiples, as you can't keep your graveyard full enough to sustain them, and they also don't synergize well with Bedlam Reveler. Remember that if you use the Lavamancer to empty your graveyard to constantly burn your opponent, and you draw a Bedlam Reveler, guess what? You can't cast it. So I don't recommend having Lavamancer and Bedlam Reveler in the same deck. I think I may have had both in my deck when I played, and I was fortunate enough not to draw both of them, but it is risky having both in the same deck. It's probably better to only have one or the other, and I wouldn't recommend more than 1 or 2 copies of either, because you don't want to draw Bedlam Revelers in multiples, because once you play the first one, you're going to be forced to discard the second one anyway, so there's really no reason to have more than like 1, maybe 2 Bedlam Revelers, and the same with Lavamancer. So I would recommend like 2 of one, 2 of the other, but not both, and that can help fill out the deck as well. So anyway, guys, hopefully that was useful. That was a lot of information, and I didn't have a lot of like card for card replacements, but hopefully that shows you how you can build the deck on a budget. Check the description below. I'm going to leave links to a couple budget versions of the deck that I built. I'm just going to show you like a $50 version and a $100 version, just so you can see, different ways that you can build this deck. There's lots of budget options. None of them are perfect. None of them are exceptionally good compared to the tier 1 deck. But the good news is, as I've said throughout this video, is this deck is very, very easy to slowly upgrade over time. So don't feel bad about making some budget cuts when you first build it, because, again, if you can't afford the Eidolons, at least they're only $8 each, right? You can go to your local game store, buy one, add it to your deck. A couple weeks later, you can buy another one, right? You can very easily slowly upgrade this over time. The biggest issue is getting into Boros, because that requires the entire mana base, like $200 worth of lands, basically. So the Boros version of the deck is much more expensive only because of the mana base, but you can build a pretty competent burn list, a mono red burn list for very cheap, and it is very easy to upgrade over time. So there you go, guys. Hopefully that's helpful. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.